Give it a second to start. I think it started. So, Jeff Booth, welcome to the Magic Internet Money Podcast. Glad you could come on.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, so it's been a wild year. It's been a pretty crazy year. I read your book probably. When did it come out? Was it mid last year or before everything hit the shit hit the fan?
Yeah,
Or
before January of last year. Yeah.
I think I read it during or after. But you were on quite the circuit when that book came out. I mean, your star rose pretty well inside the Bitcoin community and the investment community when that book came out.
Yeah, it hasn't ended. It's still it's nuts all around the world still today. It's just crazy.
How do you balance because you're an entrepreneur, right? You have a business that you're still running and you're on boards of a bunch of companies. Like, how do you balance your time between handling all this investment related media stuff and still running your company? I think I saw that you guys are going public. Something you're doing, like a reverse merger or something on the TSX.
So that company I'm not involved in anymore, but I'm involved in quite a number of others.
Oh, okay.
So I still have some shares in that company, but it's not that's not taking bandwidth at all. But quite a few others. Simply on this, I say no a lot. I know it doesn't look like it, but I probably amassed 3 or 4 times a day for different interviews and everything else. And I wish I could say yes to everything. I can't say yes to everything.
Right. Well, thank you then for saying yes to me.
You bet.
So, well, that company we're talking about is Build Direct. That was the company that you started back in like the late 90s. There was some interesting. I went back and looked at some YouTube videos that you had kind of had these keynote speeches and things like that. And I don't know if people have heard in the Bitcoin scene, but you kind of went all in on the business back during the financial collapse, and your wife and you decided to mortgage your house or sell your house to keep the company afloat. That's conviction.
Every entrepreneur knows that conviction. So if you've kind of gone into business, that's typically what it looks like. Elon Musk 1 year ago today was 1 month away from losing Tesla.
1 year ago? Oh, because of COVID.
1 year ago today. So remember when he was kind of tweeting and thrashing and trying to raise money and saying he was going to buy back the stock, all of that, Apple said no to buying it. He was in negotiations with Apple to buy Tesla. Apple said no, and he was a month away from failure on that.
Wow. I don't think many people realize that. I mean, there's the stories of him 10 years ago or 7, 8 years ago, whatever, being in that position. But I don't think many people, I didn't realize that he was that close to losing Tesla last year.
That's why, kind of, if you're an entrepreneur, and actually it doesn't matter what size of company entrepreneur, whether you own a restaurant, whether you own, you wake up every day knowing that unless you provide a lot of value, and that's not the only thing, and get lucky and smart and everything else, you could lose it all. So it's I would say that going all in, yes, tough on a family at that time. 3 kids under 4, and we sold our house to go all in on the business. And if you lost the business, you lost everything. So,
well, what was that conversation like? Was she kind of like supportive right away, or was it a negotiation that you had to kind of convince her? Like, how did that work out?
She knew who she married.
Okay.
But she has been awesome in entire time as well. It's a partnership and everything else. And I would say it probably, here's the better way to explain it. Her saying yes effectively says how much faith she has in me, whether the business you'd lose a business or not, that you could go and do something else.
That's awesome. That's great to have that kind of level of support from your partner.
Yeah.
And in your book too, you kind of talked about how you had that type of support from your parents too. Like you had a really good upbringing. Your parents are very supportive of you, and you kind of felt really blessed and grateful for having that upbringing.
So Brad, friends, family, people I spend any time with. That's what it looks like throughout my life. So I am super fortunate with that. Super fortunate. In fact, it allows you to uh, completely be yourself.
So I guess one thing I was wondering to ask you before we get into all the economic stuff and things like that, um, with your with another interview that I heard you give, you had mentioned that your parents lost their real estate, like your family lost real estate in the 90s when the interest rates
81.
skyrocket in 80s. Okay. So what was that? How did that affect you as a kid? Like how old were you? Were you a teenager or something at that time or
11.
11?
Yeah.
Okay. And how did your parents deal with that loss and how did that affect you? What lessons did you take from that to go into like the point where you're going to sell your house to keep your business going?
So remember, this is me talking about 11-year-old kid experiencing it and the things beforehand. So you might change things and I might change things and everything else. So this might not be my parents' story or anything else. We tend to remember things that are emotional or vivid. And I remember growing up without a lot of money, but a lot of love. And then both my parents were in real estate, and then we all of a sudden through the late 70s and into 80, first time I was ever on a plane, first time I was in a limo, first time, all of a sudden we had everything.
Oh, so your parents didn't come from wealth and they built it up?
Exactly. Well, they built it up through understanding real estate and what was happening.
Okay.
But at the time, real estate was going crazy. In fact, it looks like real estate today. Everybody's levering into real estate, going along and buying more and more and more real estate. And we had property and subdivisions and everything else in a lot of different areas. All of those mortgages were covering themselves. And my parents were making money on all of that real estate, and then interest rates went to over 20%, and
That's crazy.
now nothing paid for itself, and real estate was falling through the floor. And I remember you could see it unwinding as a kid. You could see everything unwinding and the stress that your family goes through throughout that. Now everything for in the end, we lost everything as family, and so you understand what that looks like. But we lost everything, and we still had everything. So interesting dichotomy,
Mm-hmm.
and it forces you to realize what's important. I think in my mind, kind of that day or when kind of through that thing, I had two things that came out of that. I am going to be so rich that I never put my family through this. And money doesn't matter at all.
Two really good
But
combo.
they're totally opposite.
Yeah.
And then again, these influences in your life create other things that then later on you unwind. And so but that probably got me on I'm going to read everything. I'm going to understand why this happened. In fact, a lot of what happened at that time, you could say is going to happen again to a lot of people right now.
Can you kind of, because I don't really know exactly what happened. Can you take us through kind of what did happen in the 80s? Was this just in Canada? Because I don't know if this happened all over the world or in the US or
It happened all over. And so in 70s, so gold, the US went off the gold reserve in 71. So they could cause inflation. So they could essentially pay back their debts with cheaper dollars. And they were successful in creating inflation, and then inflation ran away.
so to back it up just for a second for people that may be like wondering what the significance of that is. The way I understand it is the like the dollar was redeemable for gold, and then countries started to actually try to call in their gold. They started to try to redeem.
Yeah, U.S. couldn't pay for Vietnam War.
So that was the debts that they had, right? It was like the dollars were actually redeemable by other central banks and countries and citizens. Well, not citizens at that time because it was illegal.
Central banks.
Central bank.
France was trying to get paid, wanting to redeem their debts in gold.
And it was like by now there was a fractional reserve system where there was just not enough gold to pay back everybody in the dollars because they were printing dollars that weren't really backed by gold.
U.S. tax rates in the 60s were over 90%. And so there was no way to pay back the debt that was incurred. So the U.S. went off the gold exchange, and now you had a fiat money essentially backing world currencies, and so.
But why did they want to cause inflation? If they went off the gold standard, wouldn't that be enough to just say, okay, well, we're not actually paying back debts anymore because there's the redeemability window for gold is done.
So they pay them back in cheaper nominal dollars. That's the way.
Because there's still dollar denominated bonds and debts and stuff like that out there. I guess that's the.
So exactly. Now, if you have inflation, you're paying it back with cheaper dollars that are made up.
Right.
And so, in fact, inflation is the greatest hidden tax on most of society because of the same thing. You can essentially hide tax rate and inflation. The problem is it's inflation specifically enriches some. It enriches the 1% and the 0.1% and picks the pocket of everybody else. So because assets move up with the inflation, and wages move down with it.
Was that happening in the 70s, or was that? Yeah. Was that like on steroids after the 70s?
So you had stagflation in part of the 70s, and then you had an inflation rate that was moving higher and higher. And Volcker came in as the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and I can't remember when he came in, but in probably early 81, and he said we're going to get a hold of inflation, and he jammed rates through the roof. To be able so interest rates climbed, economy collapsed.
But so I'm a little confused. I'm a bit of a dummy, so hopefully you bear with me on this. And I know most people are probably a bit confused if they're not really deeply understanding the relationship between interest rates, printing money, and prices of things. So in that scenario where there was a deflationary environment, where it was stagflation, where prices were kind of stagflation is prices or prices rising with economic growth standing still. Is that stagflation?
Yeah. Yes.
So prices are rising, like gas prices and stuff like that, but economic growth is not rising. They couldn't pay for their debts in gold because they didn't have enough gold to back the dollars that they had been printing after Bretton Woods. France tried to redeem their gold. They decided no more gold redeemability. They took the dollar off the gold peg and tried to get out of stagflation, this bad economic environment where prices are rising but economic growth is not looking good. They started printing money and raised rates to try to cause what?
No, lowered rates.
Lowered rates. Okay. So they lowered rates to cause people to try to spend more into the economy and invest.
Lowered
and
rates,
borrow.
And it worked, and people borrowed, and people bought tons of housing, and so you had a rise. So everything went up, and it kept.
That was the 70s, right? That was the 70s.
Yeah, exactly, the late 70s.
Okay, and that's when your family was getting into the real estate game and started to take advantage of that system that was this newly low rate, easy credit, I guess, system where you could leverage up and buy real estate and sort of like
buy more, and the more real estate you own, the more you took advantage of it. And then and so then taxes were then rates were taken through the roof to be able to stop it. Now at the time,
because inflation started to go too high, is that what happened?
Exactly.
Okay. And like you said, like we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and this is a different time, but let's just focus. So then you had inflation going too high, rates had to go up to stop it. Now, at the time, there are a whole bunch of differences from that time to where we are today. And people want to pull out the things are the same and say everything's the same. There's a whole bunch of differences. But in that time, you're asking about what happened. Is
Hmm.
rates went through the roof. It collapsed the real economy.
How long did they let the rates go? Like how high and how long of a period did they let it stay
I
high?
can't tell you exactly in the U.S. Remember, in that time, but in Canada, rates it was like a 22% mortgage.
And do you remember, was it like a year or two where your
You,
family got in trouble, or was it like right away?
so they didn't just go to 22% right away. They went higher and higher and higher, and then as they did, both two things were happening. Uh, you couldn't service the mortgage anymore, and some properties could service mortgages, some properties couldn't. So one by one, they couldn't. But the other thing that was happening is at the same time the prices were falling on the real estate by a lot. So you couldn't service and you couldn't sell.
Right. Wow, that's like being in a vice.
Well, so and so that's what it looked like. So from an 11-year-old kid, every day it's not every day, every week it feels like it's getting worse and worse and worse until the bank owns the house you're living in.
Yeah, that's brutal.
So but again, caused by the same thing. Now remember, at the time, governments didn't hold the debt. The economy held the debt.
What do you mean, the house debt?
No. So I'm not now talking about today. Volcker could raise interest rates and he could hurt the economy and he could hurt the speculation of the economy.
Oh, so you
But he did. The Federal Reserve didn't hold all the debt.
right. So back then it was a lot of private companies and citizens and stuff that were taking on all the debt.
Exactly. Today is very different.
So now if they were when they raised rates back then, it hurt the economy more in terms of like direct impact to
Yep.
families and businesses. But now because they've kind of socialized most of the debt.
So how would they raise rates today without the entire institutions and everything else failing, like the Fed? Like how would that happen?
Yeah,
That today.
that's the modern monetary theory, Bretton Woods 2.0 thesis, I guess, right? This debts don't matter anymore.
And we'll get into that.
Yeah. But yeah, so you're experiencing this, and then your family has kind of it's going through all this stress, but your parents are kind of like being an example for you, I guess, of like love and support and how to deal with crisis.
Yeah, for sure. And what in the end, kind of what really matters. Like if you so yeah, it was. I'm not saying it was not a hard time or anything else, but money's an abstract concept, right? It's how much of it do you really need? Um, and 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 when you really understand how much you really need to do the things you want to do, forget the vanity of everything else. How much does it really matter? Yes, you need to pay your bill. Yes, you need to, but most of it comes down to I want more, more, and we get trapped in that. How much more I want.
Yeah. And for your family, I guess back then it was kind of everybody was going through that. Whoever was trying to be an entrepreneur and start businesses and really change their life and make some money and be an investor, whatever, they were probably all going through that.
It was an ugly time for a lot of people.
And then, so did you guys eventually get out of that cycle somehow? Like, how did that
Probably
resolve?
wouldn't be here if I so yes, got out of that cycle.
You have a nice bookshelf in your trailer, Jeff.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm calling in from Sunnydale, Sunnyvale. So in the 90s, then did they lower the interest rates back then? Like, how did that resolve the
Yeah,
interest rate situation?
that's what happened, and so they went up, and then then they went back down, and then they kept coming down, effectively since so they've been coming down since 90.
And then did they loosen the lending rules and things like that to allow people to take on more debt and get
What do
back
you
into?
so what do you think drove the dot-com bubble? What do you think drove the 2008 cycle around
What
real
did
estate?
drive the dot-com bubble? Because I was like 18 or something, 17. I wasn't paying any attention to that. I wasn't really, into that sort of stuff back then.
So you had a new technology, and you had something that some of the companies were going to do really well out of, but you had easy money and easy credit going into it, and then instead of correcting that problem and raising interest rates and everything else, um, you created more bubbles. So then to correct that problem, then the real estate bubble of 2008, the real estate bubble hit in 2006. The financial crisis 2008 was a derivative of the real estate collapsing.
So was it the 90s? The 90s is when they kind of introduced the derivatives market and where they
So
started marketing
let's
those out.
yeah, let's kind of go from a it, let's maybe start this at so policy in general thought thought they could manage this effect of technology competing against it. And so in the especially from the point of the 90s, probably 95 till now, technology has only moved faster and faster every year. It's on an exponential path. And now you have policy that used to be able to increase interest rates, lower interest rates, to be able to slow the economy or speed the economy, now is stuck in a different paradigm where they're competing with technology, and all looking back into their old models. You would have an ability to increase rates. People stopped buying, decrease rates, so you could do it. Now you enter technology, and everything's getting more and more efficient on an exponential scale. And now what's happened, and then what happens really starting the 90s is, instead of running the economy against what they think they know, they misunderstood how fast technology would move. And
Right.
rates essentially kept coming down lower and lower and lower to be able to try to buy their way by growth. And and a lot of the lower and lower rates caused bubbles.
Right.
And
And the
then
money printing.
yeah, but again, at first, not money printing
Right. That wasn't really introduced on
till
this type of a
2000
scale to
to
the
2008,
GFC. Okay.
right?
Right.
At
Right.
first, not money printing.
First, it was just like the
First
lever
just
of the interest rates.
lower and lower rates.
Right. Okay.
Now people have taken on debt, and that almost checkmate. If we raise rates, the entire economy collapses. So now let's abandon the free market, and let's do money printing.
Yeah.
So, and remember, and that's why I say this is kind of, you need to understand the order of magnitude that we're dealing with. Remember the marches in the street in 2008 around Wall Street,
Yep.
and that was on $250 billion of printing.
Right.
Now
Right.
we're seeing tens of trillions.
Yeah. It's pretty
And
crazy.
it has to, and mathematically it has to get more and more.
So and this is the crux of your book for people listening, that really, there's two books that I read that changed my worldview, that made me more hopeful on the future. And it was Humans Need Not Apply. Do you remember that book?
Yep.
So that book was great. It talked about the benefits of artificial intelligence. And then at the end of the book, it also talks about the concerns about how artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of jobs through automation, and we're going to have to do something as a safety net for people who are priced out, or who are like teched out of a job, as technology makes it that you don't really need to drive anymore. And that kind of made me a little bit more towards the pro universal basic income concept of having a social safety net for people who just they don't have any work. And rather than just thinking of it like a libertarian perspective of like, that's just laziness or whatever, you think of it like an incentive thing. So if you clean your neighborhood, then you get credits for UBI, or if you help tutor somebody or do something productive for society, then you kind of get credits. So it kind of helps people do something meaningful and productive with their life. And I grew up in the east coast of Canada in Cape Breton Island, and it's really bad economic circumstance in Cape Breton. Seasonal work. We've had like coal mining and steel plants and fishing and call centers are like the kind of main industries there. So I kind of grew up with that experience, with that lived experience of I didn't have many people around me that had resources, and everybody was pretty much happy. Like everybody that was living around me was in poverty when you look at the numbers. I was on welfare at points, and we lost our home to the bank at one point. Like we tried to get into the middle class and did it for a couple of years, and then the house foreclosed on us, or the bank foreclosed on us. But what it was actually like to live that was kind of fun, because everybody was writing plays and learning instruments, and everybody was performing music, and you would get your EI check, right? You'd like want to bank your hours to get your EI check, and then the rest of your time you'd spend doing creative kind of productive things, which was such an interesting dynamic. But it also made me think like, well, UBI could never work because then nobody's doing anything productive. But it's a double-edged thing. Like if you have more time and you're getting a social safety net from the government, you can focus on things like culturally and artistically and creatively. um so anyways, long story about that book, but then your book was all about how deflation, the effects of technology and deflation, where as things get exponentially better from a technology perspective, the cost of everything comes down, and there actually is no need for people to want to work these jobs, because technology will make it so that you don't need to do those jobs. And the main problem is that the Federal Reserve and the central banks are have a target of inflating the economy and inflating prices at 2% a year, which is in direct contrast to what the benefits of technology do for you. So your point was, which really spoke to me, was that you don't need to have a higher minimum wage. You don't need to have, like, if it's a true free market system where we allow technology to drop the price of everything, you don't need to have this treadmill of constantly trying to get on the rat race and earn more and more income, unless that's something that you really want to do, because the social safety net you'll still have to do something like that, but it'll be a lot more cost effective because the prices of everything will come down, so people will be able to just save and live their life like normal. So that's kind of my take on how those two things fit together. And it actually gave me a much more hopeful view of the future if we can get the central banks to stop trying to fight against technology.
But and thank you. But what I'd say and I think that's why I wrote the book. Nobody was putting two and two together. Nobody. Everybody's in a system talking about UBI on a system
Mm-hmm.
that is inescapable. Because where does UBI come from? So it comes from your taxes to be able to pay for the government, or continuing printing money. All of that game, if it doesn't come from if it doesn't come from a free market, if it doesn't come from an economy giving you value, if it comes from made up money, it's just a centrally managed plan that is just an art, like and so the person in power, which leads to dictatorship, which leads to the person who controls money controls everything else. And with technology, that's a big deal today, because you do not want to give your sovereign individual to the state to be able to control your money, because they can turn it off too. Look at what's happening in China right now, or look at what's happening in Hong Kong right now. Rules change like that, and with technology and everything else, now how do you get out of that state? So on one side, if you allow continued printing, UBI, everything else into this, that's a manifestation. It will take us there, because it's totally against the free market. And people weren't putting together that because they're caught in a system that they can't even imagine what it would look like if you let technology do its job. If you let the technology and free market do its job, prices would fall so much, we would gain time at an exponential rate. So effectively, that's what I looked forward on these trends, and I said, what would the future look like for my kids? And that's what caused me to write the book.
I love, like, the book was great. Everybody should pick it up. It's a great framework of thinking and a good way to rewire your view of like how technology can save us, not just like for the benefits of like green energy and things like that, but actually economically it makes total sense what you said in the book. And it is like one of those light bulb aha moments that nobody was saying. I'd never heard that concept before. I mean, it's kind of something we all kind of feel, but like we're all in this system where it's prices are rising and they shouldn't be.
I had a friend, I said this on another podcast, who's creating an artificial general intelligence company, not narrow AI, but it's robotics and plus artificial general intelligence company. Maybe he's not successful. Maybe but big team working on this problem. And artificial general intelligence is when machines are smarter than us, so they can do everything at scale, across, not just in one narrow domain, but across things. And his chief scientist was on stage talking about the $10 trillion opportunity they're going to create. And after her talk, I pulled her aside and said, "How is it a $10 trillion opportunity if you've made all jobs go away?" Like, it's ludicrous. But you had technology utopians talking about how much money and everything they were going to make. And again, some of my friends, a lot of my friends, but without connecting the dots, that if you remove all those jobs and you keep the same system, you have dystopian. It's a dystopian world. Unless
you allow the fake value to get flushed out of the system.
So that's it. So I said, if you kept the same system, if you move to a system that allows technology technology is supposed to improve our lives. Technology is supposed to remove labor. That's why you use it. You use it personally because it saves you time. And that's why a business puts in technology in business. They use it to be able to give better outcomes to people, not to make prices go up.
So we're both Bitcoiners, and obviously, like, we see the value of Bitcoin. You talk about it in your book, which was awesome to have that perspective. Bitcoin is just like one piece of this equation. To me, the way I look at it, after reading your book and thinking about this more, and being from Canada, we have free healthcare here. I grew up with the social safety net that kind of benefited me, maybe instilled me with a bit of a negative view on money, which I had to like reprogram out of myself as an older person. But I firsthand experienced the benefits of this social safety net. And I feel like Bitcoin fits into this situation as it's like the backup plan for if this resolves poorly, like, we can all just switch over to Bitcoin if the governments don't catch on to this trend, and if they just try to fight the trend until it just blows up. We have Bitcoin, and in the background we're just all building on this Bitcoin financial system so that it's like the backup plan that's ready to take over if they don't catch on quick enough. And at the same time, in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2008, like during Occupy Wall Street and all that, there was no alternative. The only thing you could do was get mad and get frustrated. And like, now you can actually protect yourself with Bitcoins. Bitcoin is like a shield against these dummies that are trying to manipulate the economy and centrally plan and they've proven that they can't properly do it. They keep screwing it up. So for like a financial perspective, Bitcoin definitely is a tool in the tool belt. How do you think about what is the solution? Is it like, obviously it's like we have a
So I
meme in
think
Bitcoin fixes this, but
so Brad, I actually I'm probably way more strong a Bitcoin advocate than what you just said. Like,
oh, let's hear it. I like it.
I don't think it's a backup plan. I think it has to be the plan. It is the future.
So you mean like dollars backed by Bitcoin, or Bitcoin takes over?
One or the other, but it doesn't actually matter because whether it's dollars backed by Bitcoin or Bitcoin takes over. I what do I believe? I believe eventually Bitcoin takes over, but it doesn't actually matter for what we're talking about. Bitcoin is a currency that allows for deflation. It can't be manipulated by anybody. It's decentralized. Nobody can. So everybody. It's I have power in it, not the state, and that allows for. So today, with technology advancing so fast, any system that creates inflation against that deflationary impact of technology does so by concentrating power in the state and robbing human beings of their time. It is as simple as that. It is a requirement of today's world that you have a currency that allows for deflation. Otherwise, you concentrate power, and at an ever increasing scale. So now let's say when you say dummies and everything else, but I would have to agree with you. But it's not dummies as you think it is, or people trying to do harm. It is people caught in something that they don't understand, and they thought they could manage their way out of it.
You mean the people in government, or
government? I'll ask you simply: what would you do today? Today, there's $130 trillion of negative real interest bonds. Today, 130 trillion. Pay back $1 trillion at $1 a second. It'll take you 32,710 years. So you have $130 trillion of negative real interest bonds today. That means a lot of your bond, like pension funds, everything else, are investing in that thing that on the best day, they're going to lose money. And we know it's going to be way worse than the best day. And that becomes the risk-free rate that everything else is priced. House prices, free market, stocks, everything else is priced off of that rate.
That's a tough position to be in. Yeah.
Okay. So now, but again, when you say dummies, and again, so going back in time, what created the problem is they didn't understand how fast technology changed the rules, and they tried to manage an economy through that. Today, what would you do? So if you let the free market work, those rates would go through the roof. If those rates went through the roof, the bonds are backed by nothing. It's a credit-based system. So if you allow deflation to happen, everything keeps unwinding and it doesn't stop. It keeps unwinding. Banks fail, governments fail, everything else.
So, is that bad though? Like, is it bad? Like, if you rip the Band-Aid off and put some people in jail and let the bank fail,
who manages the jails? There is no economy.
That's a good question. Yeah,
so there's nothing backing it. Like the framework you're using is on a different system. You're assuming the system can thrive. We're too far past that.
So do you think that then?
So no, let me just finish.
Sure.
So that system requires forever printing, more and more.
Okay.
Which necessarily, which is a byproduct of the printing and fiscal programs and everything else, trying to create more inflation, but it requires it. Otherwise, everything collapses. It just keeps unwinding. And remember, there's nothing backing it. It's just an IOU all the way down to the sand. There's no gold backing it. There's nothing backing it. So if it starts unwinding, it'll keep unwinding as things fail and get spectacularly bad. Civilization kind of stops in that world. You could, but that's what they're trying to avoid. Now, but the negative externalities of continuing on that system get worse and worse and worse as you divide society.
Mm.
They constantly get worse, and they get worse on an exponential scale because you have to print more and more money to keep the imaginary system going. So that's the rock and the hard place on the existing system. So change will not come from that system. Change in any system always comes from the outside, and it's imposed on the system. So what my personal belief is, if enough people start buying Bitcoin, and if that can get spread across fast enough and integrated, so it became a payment mechanism and everything else, then you can easier transition between one system that does this to a new system. And I haven't seen anything else even close to being able to allow humanity to do that. And so I'll never sell my Bitcoin.
So when do you, like, in this scenario where people shift over to a Bitcoin standard, where Bitcoin, we think of things are denominated in sats or dollars, become backed by Bitcoin, and maybe it's a bit of a fractional reserve system to allow them some leeway to print a little bit of money and create some credit and stuff like that. But it's not like we see now, which is there's pretty much nothing backing. Like the base money that backs the broad money is pretty much non-existent at this point, right? It's pretty low.
So I don't know if it'll be a fraction. So if Bitcoin wasn't if Bitcoin wasn't the standard, and a government just decided to say, I'm going to move my inflation rate up and down and everything else through a currency that's pegged to Bitcoin, then, and each country did that, I don't know. But I think it would be a stepping stone to Bitcoin all the way through.
So you think that governments will actually switch to using like sats as the currency at some point?
Not anytime soon, but I do believe at some point that the real economy is going to force them to.
Right. So whether it's governments deciding to do it or whether everybody just decides to do it and corporations do it, it kind of just happens from the ground up.
Here's the thing that we maybe even underestimated in large portions of the Bitcoin community. Not the people that really understand this, but what is a government? It's just it's somebody today we elect to do what we ask them to do. And governments change. It's not this big evil empire and everything else. It's elected, at least today, elected by the people. So if more and more people are understanding Bitcoin and what that does and how it gives them more power, and that power comes from removing it from government gets smaller, election cycles change.
So you're talking like a generational shift.
This is the biggest shift. This is in history books and everything else. If we make it through this shift, I actually really believe if we don't make it through this shift from one system to another, humanity might not survive.
Due to war?
Due to war, due to an inflationary system where you have to grow forever and you'll manipulate money to do so. Remember, you grow forever on a finite planet. And to grow forever, you'll manipulate money. Doesn't seem like a way that you could thrive.
So you think, like, because in previous times of history, there's been dominant currencies, and then those empires usually fail, but they've never had nuclear weapons or anything like that to.
Exactly, they fail, and there's a reset of currencies, typically used to be backing by gold. On essentially a new set of rules and saying to governments, trust us, this time we won't change money.
Yeah, there's only so much damage they could do with their technology.
But again, the victor comes in and says, trust us, that we won't change money again. And every time throughout history, money's changed. And why is money changed is same thing that we're talking about right now if you go back to the system. So money's changed because when a populace starts wanting more and more and more, it's easy to get elected short term by saying we can give you that.
Yeah.
So governments run budget deficits that they can't pay for, and then it escalates and it escalates and it escalates, and so they hide that in inflation, and that escalates and escalates and escalates, and so as that turns out, governments change the rules on money.
Is there any country right now that operates on a deflationary currency in some capacity that we could use as a model?
No, this is why this is such a new model, and it's and just simply technology requires it. Most of the deflation, if you looked at the natural free market, is in front of us. How much do you pay for your photos today, and what is the
Right.
your photos? Think about your music. You used to, before your time,
Or even energy, right? Like if we get,
but think about these things: your calculator, your flashlight, your like all of these things are free on your phone now, and they used to cost us money, and things are becoming free because those things are information, and that is just starting. Most of it is in front of us, and so if it took, in the last 20 years, it took $185 trillion of debt creation to stop prices from coming down. So the interest, trying to grow out of that, you're trying to drive more and more credit to try to stop prices coming down, and then a whole bunch of manipulating money to on top of that to continue that. But again, that's looking backwards over the last 20 years. Looking forwards, the technology has just started. We're in
yeah,
the early
it's a
innings.
different game.
It's a different game. So it requires. This is a. I'd have anybody debate me on this topic. It's a requirement. So anything else that somebody's debated, it's a straw man.
Okay, well, what about the scenario where I mean, the reason why I say dummies is because I feel like in 2008 they should have let the toxicity flush out of the system and taken the depressionary hit or the recession, let the banks, let the rich people that were taking all these risks, like the 0.1% elite, fail, and then kind of stop printing money.
Sounds, and Brad, it sounds
it would
like,
have sucked.
but it sounds like an interesting story, right? And again, it would have sucked, but you don't know to what degree. So my company at that time had LCs around the world. Other banks wouldn't accept the LCs, fully funded LCs. And
Lines
why?
of credit, is that
Yeah,
LC?
letter of credit.
Letter of credit. Okay.
So it's a way to do trade on giant numbers around the world. And so the counterparty banks in other countries, Europe, China, all over the world, wouldn't release goods, even though our bank said the money's here and showed them the money. Why?
Because they didn't trust that money was actually backed by real assets, I guess.
Because the money isn't backed by real assets. It's a ledger entry.
Yeah.
And in every bank, there is no money there. And so
it wasn't until the Federal Reserve said, well, we're just going to give you the money to back all this.
But again, so if global trade stops
Mhm.
in that scenario, and I was sitting watching it for 4 days, and then the government came in with and trade had stopped.
Mhm.
Food shortages, all trade all over the world, everything just keeps unwinding because there's nothing there. So it was a show of force from the Fed that essentially didn't just back the U.S. system, but back the world system, to say, no, there's enough money there.
Right.
And they changed the rules of capitalism. But again, until that time, everybody thought, oh no, it's all okay, because somebody else says the money's there. But if you just follow that all the way down, there's no money there. It's just
but like you said, nobody, when you posed me the question, right, I was honestly trying to think, like, what would I do if I was a politician or somebody in charge, and I would realize that making this decision would probably kill 50 million people because of depression and suicide and all the stuff that would happen, the chaos that would happen. causing the toxicity to flush out of the system would throw the world into a global depression, which would hurt a lot of people, like seriously, like kill a lot of people. Nobody, whether they want to make that, they don't want to make that call for the humanitarian reasons or whatever, or they're just greedy bastards and they want to like print $1 trillion for their friends. I mean, it doesn't seem like anybody wants to take the responsibility to stop the party and to take the punch bowl away or whatever, as they say.
They think they're acting in the best interests, and today, here's the thing: I completely disagree with manipulating markets, completely. But today, I asked myself, what would they do? Like, are then if they stop, are the negative externalities worse than keep going? I don't know that answer, and I don't think anybody does.
Well, you kind of hinted at it that if they did stop it, it would be more likely to end in some sort of hot war, which would be probably pretty bad.
Right. So
if they keep it going, like even Elon Musk, I really respect Elon Musk, and then I kind of wonder his thoughts on Bitcoin and why he didn't see it earlier, and then I realized that he benefits from the Cantillon effect. Like he's close to the money spigot, and even though he's changing the world and he's doing things that governments could never do, like reusable rockets and using capitalism and the free market to get the world onto clean energy and electric cars, he benefits greatly from the Chinese central bank and the US central bank and tax credits and all this stuff. So what's going through his mind when he's thinking about switching to a Bitcoin world? Because if it was a Bitcoin world and a deflationary world, he wouldn't be getting the free money from the governments and from the Communist Party of China to expand into China. So how do you think he thinks about that? How does he balance that when he's working with such a huge...
I had a bunch of interactions when, like, I don't know if you saw it, but I posted in December when he posted about Bitcoin is almost as bad as fiat currency.
Yeah.
And I posted you'll have bought it by March. It's impossible. but it's impossible, but impossible not to, because you think in first principles. And so a lot of people reposted that when Tesla put it on their balance sheet and everything else. But again, he will think through these things. I don't think you run a business. What the reason I didn't actually get in? Yeah, I knew about Bitcoin. My developers were talking about it, but the reason I didn't get into it in 2013 was I was running a business and I was totally consuming all of my time in my business. I didn't have enough time to really do the research and understand at that time. So I give them a pass on that if you're running, but as you start to think about all the next steps and first principles where this goes, I felt pretty strongly he would be one of the first major tech people into it. Because he thinks in those terms.
Well, the one kind of thing that frustrated me about reading through his timeline, like I looked at his likes and I was looking at his replies to people, and when he was memeing about Dogecoin, he something stood out to me that is a common misconception amongst people who don't really deeply think about Bitcoin yet, who haven't really deeply thought about it yet. He was actually discussing and liking posts about how the inflationary system of Dogecoin or Ethereum is actually better than the deflationary or disinflationary system of Bitcoin with a hard cap supply. So he's clearly still got a bit of a fiat mentality when he's stuck on the...
Look at that post and look at mine on top of his, and asking him some other questions. And I think some of that, what happened, me, others in the Bitcoin community, changed his mind.
So he's still on his journey to learning about why.
Exactly.
In an ideal world, then it would be like you describe. It would be we kind of use the benefits of money printing to increase the efficiency of technology to get us to the point where we have free energy. and then we switch over to this disinflationary system that benefits everybody in the planet, that's using a system that they can save in, that they don't have to be dealing with higher prices, because you allow the technology, the deflationary effects of technology, to bring prices down. So then everybody can just live a normal life and there's no central planning.
So why it's so hard to see is people think about, okay, they're so fearful of a new system that they haven't. It's just easier to tune out what a new system could look like. It's the fear of the unknown against my known safety, and you rush back to known safety. Even in the Bitcoin community, lots more people have taken the path, but some are on a journey, and they're starting to understand. Okay, how would this new way of living work? But just take a look at, forget everybody else for a moment. Just think about yourself, and in your own life, you want good, you want more for less. Seems pretty normal, right? You want prices to come down and more abundance from that. In fact, it's what you celebrate in every single technology service you use. That's why you use it in your own life. So it seems logical. And if you keep following that axis, do you want to pay for the air you breathe? Probably
No.
not, right? But why? It's so important. It's the most important thing in your life. Why don't you want to pay for it? Well, it's abundant, and we don't pay for things that are abundant. And in places where there's not water scarcity, do you pay for your water? No, because it's abundant. And so technology creates that abundance everywhere, and that's how a free market works. We're searching for it. We're searching for better outcomes all the time, and entrepreneurs are racing in to give those outcomes. And that's what we use. That's why we use Google. That's why we use Amazon. That's why we use Netflix. That's why we use Spotify. It's because prices keep coming down for more, and we get more and more for less. That's the whole point. And
No,
so if you
okay.
just think about it from your individual use of how you look at the world, and then think about, wouldn't everybody want that? And add up what that does, and you'll see the differences. You'll see today, education's already free. Education is free today. It's just your time, where you choose to put that time. You could meet the top PhDs in the world. You could meet any single topic. You could learn more today with an internet connection than you ever could. And there's abundance of information and constantly coming on any topic for free. So why do we put 16 years into school to have a master's degree in X? And we do that because it used to give us a better way to make more money. It's all tied to the same thing. It's all of these artificial constructs in our heads around how can we get more of the pie are based on an old construct that is breaking down, and this is the biggest collision. No wonder people are confused. No one, because it's not just Bitcoin, it's not just energy, it's not just everything else. Humanity is going through a phase transition of what it looks like, and that phase transition changes all the rules of what it used to look like.
How far along the path do you realistically think we are to switching to this system?
Um, so
I'm talking about like the technology and the deflationary effects of it and the money. Like now that we have Bitcoin,
so it's already here. It's already here. It's so if you measure your life in Bitcoin, do you see the deflation? Do you see deflation everywhere? It's already,
oh yeah, yeah.
but it's already here. Is
Mhm.
it you? Most people don't see it because they're measuring their life in a fiat currency that's being manipulated. It's
But we
already
only
here.
have about like 3%, 2 to 3% of the world that's on the Bitcoin uh, network. So like, you
So
think we're
that's what I care about. And if you hear me talking about Bitcoin mostly, um, it's not the price for me. I understand the price is a key component of the driver because it brings more and more people on, more people learn about it. Key component of game theory, everything else, and so it's not that I'm against the price, but um, I want more people on it. I want people to understand why it's way more than the price. Than the price. It fixes. It allows for our transition as humanity.
by the way, do you have a hard stop, or can we keep going? Because I got a bunch more questions. Maybe we do
Yeah,
a part two.
maybe 20 more minutes. Does that
Okay.
work? Yeah.
So then, I mean, something came to me there when you were talking about like 5 minutes ago that I'm always, and most of us are always very critical of the fractional reserve system and quantitative easing and money printing, but kind of in a philosophical way, you could think that this was just a phase of like getting us onto this, to the point where so much money has been available to invest in technology that we got to the point where we can now transition, and we have the technology thanks to the Cantillon effect. And the negative side of that was that it's pretty much created a two-class system where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer in real, wages and wealth. So it's kind of done a lot of damage, but it's allowed us to create this great technology to potentially switch us to a system where we can now be in an abundant world and switch to a deflationary system. Do you think that we could have done this? Because a lot of people that are like on the left, or that maybe a little bit more pro-socialist or modern monetary theory or whatever, they will always point to this fact that once we went off the gold standard, it allowed for credit to be created, and that brought us into this new age of abundance or whatever, like lifted a lot of people out of poverty and things like that. What's your thoughts on that compared to like if we had been on a deflationary currency this whole time and people were better off individually, but maybe technology was not so far ahead?
Yeah. So think about the human history and where we are. Have you heard of is it Göbekli Tepe in Turkey? 10,000 years old monuments and everything else. Just now, starting to realize that because they thought that was cities emerged and everything else, agriculture and everything else, 3,000 years BC, right? That 2,000 years BC, pyramids and everything else. This takes back a rewriting of human history to
Interesting.
10,000 BC,
Wow. Okay.
which is staggering. Remember where we are, 2080. So think of all of the years and how humanity marches forward and everything else, and then and wars, famine, and all of the information adding on top of itself, making better and better decisions. And now we're now those that exponential effect of what's happening, what's changing in a human lifetime, you couldn't even comprehend was changing in a human lifetime 50 years ago compared to today, and 50 years before that, or 50 years before that. So now think about that. We're talking about 12,000 years in human history, very few changes, and all of a sudden this feel that you can't keep up, and it's getting faster and faster and faster. On that evolutionary time scale, what you're talking about, manipulating money or or creating credit, yes, maybe changes it by 50 years. Maybe it moves it up,
Right.
but it doesn't change. It doesn't change anything. By it might change what it looks like right now. Maybe for a whole bunch of things better. But it does. But we don't know that. But you can't talk about all the good on a system without the bad of the system too. And because this is a really complex humanity, and us in it, and monetary system is a complex system. And when you try to manage a complex system with a few people thinking they can make better decisions, then the system, it spirals out of control. And so to as a simple answer to your question, yes, probably if it was hard money, some of these inventions would still be coming. If you would it have changed this scale of what we're talking about? No.
Just would have taken a little bit more time, maybe.
Exactly.
And you know, like you maybe people would have been more wise with their investments, or maybe people would have done a lot less consumerism, and maybe the manufacturing base would have like been more sensical in terms of being able to survive something like a 2008 without printing money.
Well, that's what it would have looked like. For sure, it would have looked like, because in a free market, you save your money because somebody else is going to make a mistake. And then for a rainy day, remember we were always told save your money for a rainy day. And now if you saved your money, you get wiped out by the printing.
Yeah, doesn't
So
make any sense. It's like
doesn't
it's a different game.
it's a different game. And by the way, the other side of what we were just talking about, that 12,000 years, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because of saving money that we never saw, maybe there was so much really great investment and non-misallocated capital that it actually happened faster, and it got us to all the same technology in a deflationary way of life faster.
Yeah, less of the dumb ideas got funded, and all the resources got allocated to the best people.
Exactly.
Hard to tell, right? It's a what if game. So okay, well, I just like to think about that stuff sometimes, because I don't know 100% where I stand politically and philosophically on like my views, because of my experience growing up in poverty, and getting my wife has a rare disease, a rare immune disorder, so we benefit from the free healthcare system here in Canada. So it's really cognitively challenges me on my views about libertarianism and free markets, when I see the firsthand effects of people that live in the United States with her condition that basically lose everything because they can't afford the drugs. It's like $200,000 a year for the drugs that she needs, and we get it for free here. So I happily pay my taxes, and you know, I used to be all against it, and now like that my wife has an autoimmune disorder that I see the benefits of this social safety net. I kind of have to consider my views more. So I don't know. That's probably why I'm not as convicted as most Bitcoiners on the libertarianism sort of free markets thing versus some social safety net and some socialism, because I see I benefit from it.
Yeah, when I think about that topic, and by the way, this is a hot cake because everybody will take their specific view across this. I want to live in a world with relative safety, and as well. And so I'm not going to impose my belief on anybody else. But my belief, what I would say for me, is if there was a construct to do that also helped others on a path, I'm happy to pay for that. I'm happy to pay my share of that construct. Today, these things, they're not. It's like black and white, and all the magic comes from the middle. And people line up against a side and say nothing, right? You're in it for yourself. But I don't know if they've fully calculated what that world would look like.
Mm-hmm.
There is no place you could hide if 95% of the humanity is not eating and everything else, and 5% has everything. There is no place to hide. So I don't know if that so
It's a tough one.
But because this conversation produces irrational fear and people lock into their view ideologues without thinking through all the consequences on each one. What if you paid $100,000 for every single person? There wouldn't be enough taxes to be able to pay for every single person. So on each single on every single ideologue, people lock into theirs without kind of looking at, okay, how do you construct the other side?
Yeah.
What I think is going to happen on Bitcoin is certain governments, certain regions are going to compete for talent and compete for people that are going to rewrite these rules. And those rules will be designed by the people.
And in that specific case of like the medicine that my wife needs, I mean, that's coming to a point where technology is going to bring the cost of that down so that we can synthetically create things like that? Like technology.
It wouldn't cost close to that without a 10-year cycle, or 20-year cycle of drug experimentation. And that drug experimentation, that cycle, is actually from a data feedback that is being changed drastically right now, because you would you have an idea, you do something, once you had kind of in a lab, then you trial it on a small number of people. There'd be consequences and everything. A bigger number of people, as you went through this trial gating, which is really just all information, because your genome, and what you eat, and how much you exercise, and your physical environment, and how it all of those, your gut biome, everything else produce you, is different from the next person they're trialing. And so they try to drive these giant trials with people over time, A/B tests, and then when that drug gets out into the field, then there's a whole bunch of negative the consequences, because there weren't enough trials, or that drug shows up with a different drug that causes a different problem, because it's a data problem. And these data problems, and that data problem is a derivative of people can't make very good decisions on huge complex data, and AI is making better decisions. So as you aggregate more and more AI into drug discovery and everything else, it makes better decisions, and the cost plummets.
I was lucky enough to be on a sort of semi-private chat with a Zoom call with Peter Diamandis recently. It was a friend of mine, is a wealth manager, and I guess he's a client of his or something. And he invited like 30 or 40 people to come and just kind of hear this presentation from Peter Diamandis, and the things that he was telling us about the advancements in gene therapy, AI, CRISPR, and all these different technologies. It's just amazing. Like the level of, I thought I've been following this pretty close because of my wife's condition. And so I was hopeful that this was going to be figured out in the next 10 years or something, but it seems like it's coming much faster than that.
Yeah. Does regulation let it happen faster? We'll see. But
it seems like COVID had a bit of a good impact on
that. Yeah, for sure.
And so I guess like to one of the questions I really wanted to ask you before we finish this off was, you recently spoke to the House of Commons about Bitcoin. I think it was a couple of months ago. How did that go? Like what was that about, and how did it get received?
So and this is why I have such a firsthand understanding of how people are thinking, and it's not bad people. It's just they're living in a different system, in everything they see every day. So what's happening? I spoke at the budget meeting, and I was asked to speak by the finance committee in the budget meeting, and every single person all day, and remember this happens every day, is coming in and saying, I need this much money, otherwise this many people go out, I can't feed this, my city needs this much money, I need a hospital, everything. Constant, every day. Some of those stories are emotionally touching. Some of those and so now you're a politician that sees this every day, and you're trying to decide who gets what in the same exact system, realizing that if there's, and on top of that, the central bank says, yeah, we have to be able to print you need to have a bigger budget to be able to keep all of the employment, not realizing you're caught in a system that's making the whole thing worse for everybody. But so how did it go? As I expected it would go. It's like I'm talking another language. And I understand that because they're so caught up into an existing system that they can't see the other side.
So did they were kind of glazed over kind of thing, or they were adversarial?
There were questions, but the concepts are so foreign. It's hard to rewire your brain into a new system and what that could look like. It takes time. Like people are, and so it's now I will tell you this: there's some politicians in that group that are asking me to come more and more, that are back channeling me personally buying Bitcoin.
Nice.
And so again, that's why I said it's people, it's not a system.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, more and more people, the system's gonna change.
Well, it's awesome. I mean, it can, you can tell from the way that you think about things and the way that you like put yourself in people's shoes that you know, you had a good support system from your parents and your wife and all that stuff with all the things you went through with then in the 80s and then in 2008, because you're like, you definitely feel, it feels to me anyways, like you're full of empathy and like you look at things from all the whole picture, not just like it has to be this way. It's like you
I'll
think
give you I'll give you an example. One thing my parents did when we were young, three brothers, we had to, and my one brother was 1 year younger than myself, and we had to debate at the dinner table on Sunday nights, and we'd taken a side to an argument.
oh cool.
Take abortion or any side to an argument, and you'd full on debate and kind of and you'd be so locked into your position, and then you had to switch sides. You had to debate the other side, and so I've come from a learning kind of opportunity. I think like that in just about everything else. If I can't understand the other person's side to debate that, really understand it, and sometimes you have to be that. When you said empathy, what would it look like to be them? How did they come to their decisions? What in their life created their decision, and why do they see that? But again, if I can't understand their arguments, so I can debate that from, and then I don't know it well enough. And so when you said the full picture, I like to think about that. I like to think about all of these different sides and the probability and the probabilities out that come out of these different sides.
So lastly, I guess I'm just curious, what was it, if you put yourself back into your, you know, 2008 self shoes, and you're at that point where the business is really struggling and you have to sell the house and you're talking to the wife about selling the house and she's supporting you with that, versus, you know, fast forward to what was it, 2016 or something, I think you said, when you decided to go to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Which one of those conversations was more difficult with the wife? Was it
Oh, Bitcoin was easy.
Oh, okay.
Bitcoin was super easy. It's just it made so much sense as you like go down that road, try to challenge it anywhere, and it comes back to like it's for the intellectual. Bitcoin is for the intellectually curious. It is,
Nice.
and so it's a rabbit hole of discovery, and so that one was really easy.
Does she follow any Bitcoin news or anything like that, or?
Oh, but she's married to me. She has to.
Awesome. Maybe we'll have her come on this podcast, and I'll have my wife interview your wife. That would be
Yeah,
fun.
there you go.
Well, I'd love to have you back on sometime, Jeff. This was a great conversation, and I'm still left with probably another hour's worth of things I want to talk to you about. So maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime. I'd like to maybe do that with Austin Hill, the
Awesome.
Blockstream co-founder.
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking an hour and a half of your time with me, and everybody should go pick up Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow. And where can people contact you, or how do you want people to follow up with you from here?
Best is just at Jeff Booth on Twitter.
All righty. There was a bunch of people writing comments the whole time. People were enjoying the conversation, so that's no surprise. But thanks a lot, Jeff. I'll talk to you maybe next month or something.
Perfect. Thanks.